everything beautiful and everything lovely about this world was created by God. And so we're invited in that same love to create beauty ourselves and to create a life that is beautiful, and that, we don't have to understand the theory of art. We just have to work on paying attention and inhabit, like surrendering to inhabit it and to let it lead us into a deeper love and deeper joy that we can even imagine.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Our guest today, Merideth Hite Estevez, spent years training to become one of the best oboists in the world. And you know what happened in the midst of all of that? It's what happens to a lot of us. She turned her craft into proof of her worth. She was chasing achievement to outrun shame. Somewhere in all of that performing and all of that anxiety that it produced, the joy of just playing, the joy of creating and music went away. It took a used copy of Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, handed to her by her husband, to put her back on the path. And that recovery became what she does now. She helps thousands of artists reconnect their creative lives to their spiritual ones. And now Merideth is a creative coach. She's the host of the podcast Artists for Joy and author of the new book, Art Is How God Loves Us. In this conversation, we talk about the idols we build out of performance, the disordered loves hiding underneath perfectionism, and the gig economy pressure to turn every craft into content, and what it means to redefine art itself. Not as talent for the elite few, but as something anyone can do out of love rather than necessity. If art is how God loves us, what does that mean for us as people who are beloved, as people who are loved by God? What do we do in return to Him as worship? She redefines art as atoms responding to transcendence. And I love that. It is something that we do in response to being beloved by God. So what would shift in you, in your own creativity, in your own life, if you believed that your creativity was already loved, that you were already loved before you ever did anything? So join us. Here is my conversation with Merideth Hite Estevez. Merideth, welcome to Shifting Culture. So excited to have you on. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Joshua, for having me.
I'm excited to dive into your new book, Art Is How God Loves Us. You really take that a little bit from a Makoto Fujimura quote from his Faith in Art book. God creates out of love, not necessity. What really resonated with you when you thought about art and God and love and creativity? What did that do for you? Why'd you glom onto that?
I realized when I read that quote that I had created out of necessity instead of out of love. I am a Juilliard trained oboist, and I went to 12 years of college at Ivy Leagues and some of the best music schools in the world. And I got to the end of that 12 years of higher education in music, and I had really lost my joy I had forgotten the spiritual connection that I used to feel with music as a kid. And so since I graduated, I've been on a journey. It's, almost been 20 years ago at this point. I'm looking for ways to connect my spiritual life with my creative life, because I really feel like that has been the central key in recovering my joy, but also finding sustainability and finding creativity to be a fulfilling process of seeking well-being, not a way for me to prove my value and prove my worth. And so when I read that book, Art and Faith by Makoto Fujimura, and I came across that quote, God creates out of love, not necessity. I was like, yeah, there's a whole book in there. And so I started remembering and sort of paying attention to moments where I had felt God speak to me through music and art and sculpture and trees and rivers and created things. And then I started looking for examples of that in literature, in novels, in other nonfiction books I read, and they were everywhere. And so the book is really a celebration of how art speaks of God's love, and how if God's creative power is synonymous with God's love, then maybe every time we seek to create and get into creativity as a spiritual practice, then we can be part of that love, experiencing it and to share it.
Why do you think that we've maybe missed some aspect of God's love out of creativity and our love out of creativity? Like, where did we miss this love aspect of it?
Well, I think it goes along with idol worship, sort of the whole theme of the way we disorder our loves, right? And I think for me, I had turned my performance into an idol, right? I thought that if I just achieved a little bit more and I could possibly outrun this shame that I feel and have felt since childhood, that I just wanted to perform my way to being worthy. And I think it's really common in my coaching practice where I work with artists to help them connect their spiritual life to their creative lives. I think that's a really common thing when we turn our crafts into content and we're tempted to make everything into our next side hustle, and we lose that impulse to connect with God and create from a spiritual place.
It's a difficult time that we live in for that, right? Because everything we think that we have to throw it up there, let everybody in the world try to talk to us about our art, say if is it good enough. It's very performance oriented, performance based, and we think that we live in a newer world than it was in the Industrial Revolution, that we make money out of like our own. It's like a gig economy, right? So we're trying to like produce something. As you were like moving out of the space of like losing some of your joy and creativity, and maybe thinking things were about perfection and performance, and there was no joy left in art, how did you start to get some of that joy back, to know that art isn't just about performance and perfection?
Yeah, I'll say I always give credit to Julia Cameron for putting me back on the right path, because her book, The Artist's Way, which is one of the top selling self-help books of all time, the subtitle is A Spiritual Path to Higher Creativity. My husband, who is a Presbyterian minister, he sort of like gently, as husbands do, sort of like, hey, you should read this book, and because he had read about it, I guess, in seminary or in college. And somehow with all my training in music, nobody had ever told me about that book. We had been working on theory and scales and making reeds in my world. And so that book was really profoundly impactful, not only in helping me with my own recovery, but helping me experience God's call on my life for this vocation to invite artists into a more wholehearted spiritual conversation through their work. And so it was, right when I left New York and Chicago and found myself married and living outside of Philadelphia and in Wilmington, Delaware. And Edwin gave me that book, and I started leading those creative clusters in person. And then when COVID hit, it all went online, which actually was profoundly impactful, because then we could reach more people, and we could, so my latest creative cluster, had 1,000 people registered from all over the world just to talk about these ideas that Julia Cameron put forth. And so I've really felt like that when I was at my lowest low, that book met me where I was and reminded me how much God loved me and how much creativity was an expression of God's love, and helped me, I hope, to help others to find that too.
In your book, you talk about art. You use a new acronym, right? Atoms responding to transcendence. And you're talking about art as evidence of this creating spirit, calling matter deeper into spiritual reality, the reality of what really is there. How do you think that art and creativity gets us to a place of what is really real, what's underneath the surface of what we think is reality?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you for allowing me to talk about art, Adam's responding to transcendence, because that's really one of my favorite things about the book is redefining art, which is a word that comes from the Latin word ars, which is connected to skilled labor. Okay, so from the very beginning, we've been talking about art in relationship to skill. And I think that idea can be really harmful for both professional artists and amateurs, or those who, and by the way, the word amateur comes from the root to love, right? For the love of something. You do it for the love of it. And so we've made art into this capital A, only for certain people, elitist thing that only some people can do. And I wanted to find a new definition to invite people who might not consider themselves artists with a capital A to pick up the book and realize that they too are made of atoms, and they too can respond to the transcendence that's already among us, that's here in process, in creation, each and every new day that God is making. And I think that, just like in the conversation we were having at the beginning, that we want to see product, we want to see value, and we tend to weigh something's worthiness on how useful it is, and we're a product of our culture. But I think that the reason why, in the whole Timothy Chalamet conversation, I don't know if you saw that, where he talked about the decline of the arts, and how he doesn't want to be associated with ballet and opera. And I really resonated with not what he said, but with the sentiment of what he said, because I, as a classically trained musician, I have had to sing for my supper and prove to people why the oboe matters. But I think what's at the heart of that, especially in terms of shifting culture and thinking of art beyond skilled labor, is that this decline of the arts is really a spiritual crisis. It's really a well-being crisis, where we keep trying to make art be content, and we want to understand it, and we read the placards, and we read the books, and we get obsessed with the theories, and we miss out on this invitation to inhabit it, to experience it as a thin place, to speak to the spiritual.
Go to your thin place. Like, what does that look like? And speak to what is a thin place for people.
Sure. So, well, let me define it in case no one's heard that term before. It's from Celtic spirituality, and it's the name for a place where the distance, or the wall between this world here and the spiritual world is thinnest. And so where we feel the goosebumps, the tears in our eyes, the bubbling up of joy, the connection and the closeness of God's love. And really, the book is, my new book, Art is How God Loves Us, is really a celebration of those thin places through art. But I'll tell you about one. I was sitting in my final ear training exam at Juilliard. And ear training is the fancy term for where we learn how to hear music so that anytime that something plays, we'll be able to write it down or to analyze it. And it was very, very stressful. The class was really difficult because I had come up in the wrong school of ear training. I had learned movable do, which is like solfege, like do, re, mi. And Miss Cox at Juilliard wanted me to sing in fixed do, where the note C is always do, et cetera, et cetera. And so this class, for my perfectionistic doctoral student self, was a very difficult psychological torture, really, to go in there and to feel like I ended up passing with a B-. But I'll just tell you, it took a lot out of me that during that program. So we were sitting in that class. It was my final exam, and everyone was supposed to recite in fixed do solfege, sing in front of everyone a piece from their instrument's repertoire. And I was, shaking. I had to stop drinking coffee on the days I had ear training. And I was looking down at the music that I was going to recite, the Strauss Oboe Concerto, second movement. And all of a sudden, one of my classmates stood up, and I barely knew him. He didn't really speak a word to anyone, very quiet. He was a pianist, and he stood up and he started singing a melody from a Chopin piece, Andante Spianato, which you should Google it. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. And he started singing this melody. And it gives me goosebumps to even talk about it now. All of a sudden, it was like a door was opened and it reminded me, it was like God had been there all along. And in that little ear training exam with a pianist who didn't have a really especially great voice. And as a wind player, I'm always looking for how people are breathing, and he wasn't breathing, quote unquote, right. But somehow through it all, that melody reminded me of what I love about music and what I love about God, which is this childlike, abundant, playful richness. I mean, it sounded like a melody that I had heard before, like I knew it like a lullaby or something, but it was a totally new piece of music to me. And I teared up in that exam, and I wasn't crying because I was nervous or sad. I'd cried many times in that room for that reason. But it was almost like God was saying, I'm still here. It's still here. It's still possible to find your way back. It can be as simple as a tree blooming this time of year, or a piece of fine art, or something your kid makes, or a little poem my daughter wrote poems this month for April Poetry Month. Once you start noticing them and naming them, they can be everywhere.
Those sort of moments, it feels to me like what they do to me. Like before we started this conversation, I was listening to an album from Ray, and Ray's new album it's about hope in the midst of despair, and the music, the songwriting, everything about this album. These songs may contain hope is the name of it. It gives me an imagination for new life, for love in the world, where there is despair, where there's chaos, where there's difficult things. It feels like even something like that melody that you heard, there's a jumping off point that it's not just for that moment, but it feels like there's a new imagination that could take place for how the world truly is. I don't know what to do with that to get it to the place of my life is going to change just a little bit to see some of this love come to fruition in this world. What do we do with those thin moments? What do we do with those moments to say, okay, I have an imagination for something better? Here at Shifting Culture, we think honest conversations about hot topics like immigration shouldn't just happen on a podcast. They can and should happen around our dinner tables, in our small groups, and with our kids. That's why today's sponsor, World Relief, created the valuable conversation starting tool, Let's Talk About It. 50 conversations on home, belonging, and loving your neighbor. These conversation cards give you practical ways to start meaningful conversations about displacement, immigration, and what it really looks like to love our neighbor. If you've ever wanted to bring dialogue like this into your home or church, this is a great place to start. Download your free set of conversation cards from World Relief today at worldrelief.org/shiftingculture. That's worldrelief.org/shiftingculture. Looking for books that help you think deeply, live faithfully, and engage the world with wisdom? At Erdman's Publishing, we've been publishing thoughtful books for more than a century, bringing together trusted voices in faith, life, spirituality, and culture that inspire meaningful conversation and lasting impact. Explore a collection that invites readers to move beyond belief and into a lived faith. Erdman's books are for anyone asking hard questions, doing the inner work, and seeking hope, purpose, and deeper understanding. Wherever you are on your journey, you'll find stories and ideas that point toward what's possible. Visit erdmans.com and use promo code CULTURE40 to receive 40% off all titles. That's right. That's erdmans.com, promo code CULTURE40.
I think that's an invitation to submit to the creative process and listen for what is next that will come through you. Because sometimes another reason why we often get discouraged in these thin closed moments is like we hear the music and we're like, well, I'll never write a melody like that, or I'll never write a song as good as that. What's the point, And I always recognize now, like, that's not the voice of God. That's the voice of fear. And that's me running from the call of love, right? To step into the difficulties that love invites us to, right? Like I was just listening to your conversation. We were talking about it before we logged on with Tish Harrison Warren about sometimes love calls us into doing hard things and to needing to surrender. And so I think that's once we have those, and that's, I say in the book, like once I heard that melody in that exam, I wish that I could say like, oh, and then I let go of all my problems and my shame and I got over it and I got over myself and just started being joyful again. It's like, well, no, in fact, I like walked around New York City and like listened to that song in my headphones for a couple of months. And then I just, sewed back up the armor of trying to get through it. And 3 years later, I finished the program. Right. And so maybe seeing them too, as beyond an invitation to create, an invitation to let a seed be planted and watered within you and trusting that God will bring the growth.
You write through 3 major sections of your book, right? The spark of finding God as artist there, the shadow, which is the really companion in the darkness, art is, and source, art is the way back to who we are ourselves, which as we're walking through some of those, if we get into the shadow, if we get into the chaos, when you're in the midst of really some hard, difficult times, what helps you get back to your creative self, that you are like your image bearing self? When you look at the world and the chaos of the world, what helps get you back there?
The shadow portion of the book is really my favorite. It was my favorite part to write. I'm an Enneagram 4, and so I love to go into the shadows. And so I loved that part. And the work of art I'll mention now about that, because it connects to your question, is a sculpture by Ruth Duckworth, who is a German American. She immigrated to America in the 60s. It's a sculpture made of clay. And usually clay is not, great artists, quote unquote, sculpt from marble, right, or bronze, but not clay. And so Ruth Duckworth she wanted to work in clay, and she made this sculpture of creation. And it was a really powerful work of art to consider by the light of a trip to Germany where we went to Dachau and we looked at the Holocaust and World War II history and art of those times. And Ruth Duckworth's sculpture of creation, in the middle, there's this sort of chaotic primordial goo, and it's dark and chaotic, like you described. And then it's a spiral. And on the way around, she has humans and animals and, separating the sky and the clouds. And then on the 7th day, the day of rest, that chaos, that primordial color and darkness and disorder comes back. I sort of read that she wrote about it and said that she had great anxiety around the climate. And this was back in the 80s. I mean, she was really like talking about her concerns for the future of our planet and our world. But for me, that art, that expression of art, to hold the question of, okay, so, is God creating still? And are we going to be part of it? And there is chaos here now. And so what does that mean? And how can I be a part of the recreation, the co-creation with God today? And I loved that sculpture because we went on a trip to see Dachau, and it gave me permission to sort of let art hold the questions in the air and the injustice and the great pain and great grief, and begging God to answer questions. And, if God is our potter, God works in clay too. And so finding, the hope amidst the chaos, for me, it means finding art that allows those questions to stay there and not have to have them have all the answers, and to look for places that, these songs could contain hope, like that invite us amidst the chaos. Don't deny it, but to be a light and to find God's love in the act of creation.
What does good art look like, especially when it comes to like art and faith?
Yeah, I think for me as a professional artist with a lot of training, I've had to like wipe the word good from my vocabulary because sometimes that's the question that question leads me down a road away from curiosity and more towards judgment. And so And I'm really interested, especially with my coaching clients and people I work with who are very blocked and haven't made art in decades or years. I want them to make bad art. I want them to make art, period. I want them to work with the atoms that are already responding to transcendence here and now, and to begin to be part of the process instead of looking for the product. And so I think somebody asked me on another interview about, what do you think about Christian movies that are there to convert people? And I think they wanted me to say like something rude or have a hot take. But instead I said, isn't it amazing that there's art for everyone? I mean, truly, I could be the judge, and trust me, I have been the judge of myself and of my children, of my family, and many, many other people. But that never brought me joy. It made me feel a little self-righteous sometimes. But I want to ask, not is the art good, but does it connect? Can I connect with it? And sometimes it's not going to connect with me. But that doesn't mean it's not good. It can connect with someone. And maybe the question for you, if you're an artist and you're listening to this, like, how do I know if my art is good? It's like, well, do you like it? And if not, could you find something in it that you like? And, seeing is again, you have to love this process of creating and seeing your life as a work of art instead of becoming obsessed or becoming too concerned with naming it good.
And I think when we try to name it good, what we're trying to do is figuring out what is the process towards what you just said is the process towards connection. If I'm trying to maybe create out of maybe a false sense of identity of who I am, or create out of like what people want instead of how I can connect with people, then I think the process is maybe a little off.
Totally.
And so if we could get back into a process of connection and love, I think that could do wonders for me. You have a section of your book and you talking about identity and formation and who we are and getting back into really our truest selves as beloved. In this chapter, you talk about the Shaker tune, Simple Gifts. When you were hearing it in its different forms and stages and the Appalachian song and others, how did that speak to identity, and why do we need to get down as artists into our truest identity?
I wrote that chapter when I had been to my bibliography class, which was, I didn't mean to write a book about with exact taking down my teachers at Juilliard. Like, they were great. I was the problem. But this one class, bibliography, we had to study all of these different, how to research. Anybody who has a doctorate took a bibliography class of something. And in bibliographies in music, you have to learn about tune indexes. And there's this huge book somewhere in some library that has every single melody that composers have ever written in a particular genre. And so in hymns, it's called hymnody. And so the tune indexes of hymns have like the name, Simple Gifts, and it'll have different iterations of that tune, made most famous in Aaron Copland's Appalachian Spring, but, also exists as a hymn in the Methodist hymnal called The Lord of the Dance. Sorry, I grew up United Methodist, and that was one of our bangers. So when I read in that hit tune index the different iterations of the same melody, right? It was a melody that was written for a dance. It was a shaker dance. It was supposed to be up-tempo, quote unquote, supposed to be. And different people had interpreted it and translated it and transfigured it through different iterations and different ensembles and different orchestrations. And that, as a metaphor for our identity, really hit me, because I had latched onto that tune as a kid in 3 of its different forms, and I saw the beauty in each of them, just like I had been named, a classical musician, a daughter. My mom always called me Birdie because I was always flying away. I'm a mom. I'm a wife. I do all these things, and we're tempted, I think, especially at different phases of our lives, to look at our identity and look at what the world calls us, the world's iterations of our tune, our melody, and take that to be the truest sense of who we are. And I loved this idea of thinking that maybe only God knows my tune name, that only there's the iteration of me that exists in some pure form, my true self, maybe, that when I am in centering prayer and when I'm closest to God and when I'm in those thin places like that, I'm being reminded of my true name, my true song that was given to me at birth. And so I think we must work hard in the world, and maybe work hard is not the right word because a lot of times it's about surrender. It's not about working, right? It's about letting go, that kenosis of like letting God, less of me and more of God, and remembering who we are and whose we are.
Can art help me get down to my truest song? Can God love me in that way to find my true song and the song that I was born with? Like, is that possible that art can help?
I do. I think so. Obviously, I'm a convert, but I'm curious to hear from you. You know, what holds you back from art experience, art calling you into your truest self?
For me, it's about, performance. Am I good enough? It hits on the whole, bunch of things that I've needed healing from that then form my identity, form who I am. And so it's shame and hiding if I'm not good enough. So it's a simple thing. When somebody tells you growing up that you're the best, and then you form like, if I'm not the best, then it means I'm no good. So
Yeah.
that means that when I'm want to actually create, I want to create the best thing. And it's like, well, that's not possible. So so that hinders me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, of course. Me too. And I've been really struggling because I kind of, I won't say that I healed totally, but I got over a lot of my seeking my validation through music. I did a lot of work around that in, the early 2020s. And that was really what my verse book was about. But now I think in this phase, I'm having to, it's always the same temptation to now I'm putting my performance on my writing and my social media and how successful this book is going to be. And so I read about this recently. I have to sort of check myself before I wreck myself at all times. But the key that has been in this phase is choosing to separate my creative impulse from my content creation. And it's not that content can't also be spiritual and deeply inspired and having a conversation with faith, like, yes. But when I'm only creating for the critic or for the followers or for the eyes of others, there's something I'm holding back that I'm not really giving over to God. And so I'm working on writing out of the words that I feel that bubble up, not because I want to turn them into a Substack post, but because I feel that I'm called to say them and I'm called to notice and pay attention to the beauty and the poems that are right around me. And I just, make myself, and you have to have some devotion to it. I don't use the word discipline because discipline brings back that try hard sense in me. I want to be devoted to creation for the purposes of having a conversation with God more than I am devoted to creating for accolades and even ministry sharing with others.
How do we do that? If everybody is an artist, right? If we are creators, like this is who we are as human, how do we do that if you're not a professional or you don't like see yourself as someone who creates like the art thing, whatever it be, painting or music or whatever it is, writing? What does it look like every day to pay attention and to become your creative self? Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening and thank you for supporting the show. If you'd like to support the show and get early ad-free episodes, you go to Substack at shiftingculture.substack.com. And with your subscription, you could have a private podcast feed in your podcast app where you get to download early episodes before anybody gets to listen to them. You could also support the show by going to the support the show link at the bottom of the show notes in the app that you're using right now. That goes to a page that supports the work my wife and I do around the world. That donation is also tax deductible. So if you want a tax deductible donation, you could go there. Or if you want to support the show by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that really helps new listeners find the show as well. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. And thank you so much for supporting this work so that we could see the body of Christ look more like Jesus.
Well, I think that Eric Booth's definition, he's a writer and a teaching artist. He defines creativity as making things you care about. And if art is atoms responding to transcendence, then being an artist is to use the atoms that are already responding to transcendence in whatever form they're in your life and to create things you care about. And that looks like the way you raise your kids. It looks like the music you pick to sing along to in your car ride where that nobody's going to hear, the recipe you choose to make for your family for dinner. Like it's not something that you have to choose to be. It's something that you name ways that you already are and enjoy the conversation you're having with the spiritual around, cutting into a ripe avocado and, choosing even sports, even the physical act of moving. You might not think like I'm not an artist if I'm like playing pickleball, but the way you play with your teammate, the way you move your body, the kind of racket you choose, those little things are choices. You're responding as an atom yourself to creating a life that you love. And I think that makes everyone an artist, because being an artist does not mean you need skill or need to be good. It means it's something that you already are, that you can find deep joy and love by naming that's part of your identity.
Since we're already doing that, most people go through life not paying attention to the stuff that they're already doing, right? So as our brains, like 90% of our decisions that we make are like automatic. They're unconscious during the day. And so a lot of times I go through life and I don't feel like I'm like going through life as an artist, as a creative. I feel like I'm going through life as a robot sometimes and just making decisions. Are there practices, things to help us like slow down and pay attention to like craft some of this within us so that we can like pay attention to the creativity of it all, of who we truly are and not just the unconscious activity that we do all day?
Sure. I'll give you two things. One is hard and the other one is a little easier. I am a tried and true follower in the belief that the morning pages, which is one of Julia Cameron's basic tools, it's the 3 pages longhand stream of consciousness writing every morning before, as soon as you wake up, before your coffee. And like people are like, but I want to drink my coffee. It's fine. Like just like centering prayer, the only wrong way to do it is not doing it. And so just getting up and slowing down and I like it. And people are like, well, I have trouble with my arm and I don't want to do longhand. And that's fine. If you wanted to like type your morning pages, you can. Again, whatever is cool. But the fact that if you do slow down and physically write them, it makes you not only have to go slower, but you see your thoughts. And so that is my number one tool for mental clarity, finding, slowing down, not feeling like a robot, feeling human. The morning pages will do that. And you may find, Julia Cameron talks about the 1.5 page truth point, that you really have to write 1.5 pages before you really get to what you're really feeling or what's really in there. And so if you feel like you're complaining and just whining about how tired you are for a page, that's okay. It's just part of the process. And I kind of see that as like rinsing out the espresso machine before you make your coffee, that it's like, okay, let's move some of this junk so I can get to the real thoughts, the ones that feel most like me. So that's the first one. And the second one is an exercise from my book. Throughout each chapter in the book, I have these things called Ars Nova, which is a Latin term for new art. And my favorite Ars Nova exercise in the book is one called Let Art Be Light. And so what you do is you pick a work of art, and it can be a tree in your backyard, or it can be a work of fine art in a museum. And before you view it, you pick you pick a challenge or something, a difficult thing in your life that you want to shift your mindset around or change your mind around. And so you name, I'm really grieving, this news, or I'm deeply disturbed by the news today about this or that justice issue. And you name your challenge, or you name the thing that's difficult, and you look at the work of art and you pray in the moment and ask God to shed light through the work of art on your next move or your shift that you could make. And so letting art be a light, viewing art as a lens, as a thin place, will help you name ways in which you can step into just slight shifts of mindset, slight shifts of lens, and find more joy and be more open to the way that God is moving here and now.
Both of those are really helpful for us to be creative. And I think that arts can help us encounter God. What does that look like to encounter God through art?
For me, it looks like having my attention given back to me. It's almost like, I give my attention away to many things that distract me. And so when I encounter God in a work of art, whether it be a song that comes on the Spotify list or a sunset, we have an agreement in our house. If there's a beautiful sunset, we yell sunset alert and everybody drops what they're doing and comes into the patio and looks at it with us. And it's like an attention, that encounter for me is like, come to me is what I feel God saying in those moments. And like, here is your attention. It's being returned to me again. And I get to choose to step into it. And so, yes, maybe the encounter of seeking God and through art, the first thing is to just be awake and open to the encounters and to listen for when somebody yells sunset alert and stop what you're doing. They've made me like get out of the shower and like come in there in the like dripping wet bathrobe before. That's how serious my children are about sunset alerts. And so looking at that encounter, seeking God and just finding the attention. And, I don't want to turn this whole art viewing thing as like every time I look at art, I get slammed in the head by a message from God. It's not like that. But I do feel like ever since I wrote this book and started looking for ways that God spoke through created things, human made and natural, I am more likely to see them. It's sort of like the more coincidences you name, the more coincidences you have. It's like, oh, it's actually been there all along. And I just had to slow down enough to notice it.
What was the last one you noticed?
Well, there's a road that I walk every morning. I try to do this loop in our neighborhood. I drop my kids off at the top of our hill. We live in the suburbs in Michigan. And this time of year in Michigan, the weather is all over the place. I'm telling you, it's like one day it's snowing in April and then it's like beautiful 80 degrees. And so honestly, I love the seasons and I love spring in Michigan because it's just kind of feisty. And I enjoy that like feistiness of weather. I grew up in South Carolina where it was just hot and then slightly less hot. But there's this road on my walk and most of the roads here are paved, but occasionally in Michigan, you'll find these unpaved residential streets. And so I turn on there and every morning I'm looking for how dry is this muddy road going to be? Because one day it's frozen and then it melts and it gets super sloshy and I have to determine whether I'm wearing the right shoes. And this morning the sun was out and it was still a little chilly, but the road was really starting to dry. And it's just a simple thing of just and I felt God sort of stopping me in my tracks and being like, I am making all things new. It might not be in your timeline and it might even snow again, but just noticing how dry the land is, being attentive enough to return again and again to that road to see what God is doing there has been one way that I have felt God speaking through created things. The last one, that was a couple hours ago.
And a realization that God is making all things new. And it feels like when I am able to step into a place of, I could join Jesus in the restoration and reconciliation of all things, like I could be a part of it here and now and not just wait for new creation to come, but I could be a participant, a creative participant in new creation now. In the world that we live in today, we are in a turbulent, chaotic, hard, difficult world full of despair and feeling like a lot of people feel like it's the end of things. Like there's so many post-apocalyptic shows and movies. We're inundated with this stuff. Like the world is ending. What are we going to do about it? You end with Beethoven's codas, where we think it's ending, but there may be something beautiful. So for people who's thinking about the end of all things, the endings, what do Beethoven's codas teach us about maybe the reconciliation, God making all things new, the beauty that can come at the end?
I love that. There's a Leonard Bernstein quote where he talks about Beethoven, and he says, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it memorized, but he says, when you hear Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, for example, you just feel like there's some goodness in the world, like there's something right. And I think that is a testament to the power of God to speak through art and through people of different faiths, and we can hear the rightness of God and the reconciliation that is coming. We can hear that in a piece of music written, in the 19th century, right? And so I want to say Beethoven, his music is very tumultuous and fiery, and he did experience the deafness rather early. A lot of people don't know, but even by the Third Symphony, he was basically deaf. And what I love about his music, there are many things I love about it, but you mentioned the coda, and for the non-music people, the coda is sort of, we like end the music where the form is supposed to end, and then there's a little play out or a little extra added part at the end that is that comes along and sort of like ties it on a bow, like dun 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 dun. That's the coda. But in Beethoven's music, sometimes his codas were almost as long as the A section or the exposition, we call it in sonata form. And there are times in other composers where they bring up completely new themes in the coda, and they go to a totally foreign harmonic place. And I think that we as humans, we want thematic continuity. We want to understand that, like, okay, God created A, and then there was B, and now there's A again, right? And I think thank God, God is a lot more creative than that. is a God of surprises and mirth and joy and like detours of harmonies at the 11th hour. And I think that for me represents the goodness of God, that there is beauty and joy right here in the chaos. And maybe as artists, we're called to be part of the beauty that's here now, and focusing not on the end and focusing not on the ways that our expectations are not being met or are, have been dashed, but in joining, like you said, in the reconciliation. And I think beauty is a profound way to experience reconciliation and to invite others into it. So yeah, I love that idea. This is just the coda, people. There's some good music here. Keep listening.
That's right. Keep listening. What would you say to readers? What do you want people to get from Art Is How God Loves Us?
Oh, I want them to get so many things, but I guess if I had to pick one, I would invite them to see the beauty of God and the beauty of creation, that everything beautiful and everything lovely about this world was created by God. And so we're invited in that same love to create beauty ourselves and to create a life that is beautiful, and that, we don't have to understand the theory of art. We just have to work on paying attention and inhabit, like surrendering to inhabit it and to let it lead us into a deeper love and deeper joy that we can even imagine.
A couple of quick questions here at the end. One, if you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Whoa. I would first of all say, please eat, because I had an eating disorder at that time. And I would spend a lot less time worrying about my body and my body image and myself, and look more towards the ultimate things instead of the superficial, things that are here and now. And so that's a good lesson for me to take with me. So that's a really good question. I also was really worried in my 20s about being married, and having grown up in a Christian world. I think I felt pressure to like meet the person and have the kids, and you better do it before you get too old and your eggs are going to die. And I didn't meet my husband until I was 33. So I would have said, it's worth the wait. And 33 is young, right? And so like, even if you haven't met the person, or even if you never get married, it's all good. And like your identity is not in whether or not you're successful or married or whatever, just to remember that those things are temporary and one part of a really full life.
Anything that you've been reading or watching or listening to lately that you could recommend?
I just finished The Pit. I'm a little behind. I don't know if you ever watched that show on HBO Max.
Oh, yeah.
Loved that
Fantastic.
show. I mean, it was like a little stressful because, there's like...
It's an emergency room?
Yeah. But yeah, I'm trying to think. I want to say a TV show, but my husband and I love whodunits, especially of the British variety. And so we are watching Young Sherlock right now too. That's on Prime Video, I think. But yeah, lots of good books. I read Shannon Martin's Counterweights. I had her on my podcast. It's a really great book. Yeah. So those are just a few.
Good recommendations. That's great. Well, Art is How God Loves Us will be available July 7th, anywhere books are sold. How could people connect with you? Anywhere else that you'd like to point people to and what you're doing?
Thank you so much for asking that, Joshua. Yes, the book is available July 7th, wherever books are sold. I always like to tell people to go to bookshop.org and support local bookstores. And as for me, I am on Instagram at Artists for Joy, plural Artists for Joy. That's also the name of my weekly-ish podcast, Artists for Joy. And I'm over on Substack. This week we were top 50 in the category. That was really exciting. Nice. Rising star or something, whatever. But it's called, my Substack is called Art's Open Door. And we talk about faith and art more explicitly through the Christian lens over there on Substack. It's called Art's Open Door.
Awesome. Well, Meredith, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for actually bringing the love of God and the love of your creativity here into this conversation. I really enjoyed meeting you, talking with you, and this conversation was great. So thank you.
Me too. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to this episode of Shifting Culture. This show was edited and produced by me, Joshua Johnson, at Shifting Culture Productions. If you're enjoying the conversations, consider supporting the work by subscribing at shiftingculture.substack.com. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get ad-free early access episodes and other exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox. I'd love for you to not just listen, but engage. Reach out, share what's resonating, and let's keep shaping culture together. Whether you're a listener with feedback, a creative with an idea, or a brand looking to connect with a thoughtful, engaged audience, let's talk. If you're interested in advertising on the show, I'd love to hear from you. Contact me directly for rates and availability. Until next time, let's keep shifting culture.